Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here in the city of Glenarden, Maryland, for the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Prayer Breakfast here at the American Legion Auxiliary Unit 275. Mayor Cross, I want to thank you for that wonderful introduction. I also want to thank the president of this fine organization, Miss Linda Waters, and my dear friend, Miss Betty Harris, for extending the invitation to me to come and share with you on this very special occasion. Betty and I, we serve in the military care and share ministry at the National Church of God. 39 years. That is all he had. Yet the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would change the pages of history, and his name would traverse the corridors of time. As we honor his memory today, let us reflect on the legacy of Dr. King as, number one, a servant leader. Number two, who inspired others. And number three, he championed a movement. Born on January the 15th, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. King, a Baptist minister and civil rights activist, was one of the most prominent leaders in the civil rights movement from 1955 until his assassination in 1968. Although I was only 8 years old at that time of his murder, I recall my blind grandmother, who was married at age 14, and then she gave birth to 17 children and was widowed at age 48, crying profusely when it was announced that Dr. King had been assassinated. Although we did not know a lot about him at that time because we were young, but my grandmother took the time to explain to us what had happened, because you see, she wasn't always blind. And so I just praise God for having that grandmother in my life that would take time to explain to us what was going on. So let me ask you a question. How many of you would agree that Dr. King was a true servant leader? Can I just see a show of hands? Yes, yes, yes. He was a true servant leader. Dr. King did not rest on his laurels, but he put action to his voice. He participated in and led marches for the civil rights, for the right to vote, desegregation, labor rights, and other civil rights initiatives. He oversaw the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott and later became the first president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Dr. King was one of the leaders of the 1963 March on Washington. Here he delivered his iconic speech, "I Have a Dream," on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. In this 17-minute speech are the words, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, not some men, but all men are created equal. Oh, I have a dream today." A laborer in the vineyard, Dr. King also helped to organize two of the three Selma to Montgomery marches during the 1965 Selma voting rights movement. These actions produce monumental results. The civil rights movement would later achieve key legislative gains in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Although Dr. King never reached his 40th birthday, he was committed to seeing that our nation lived up to its promise of liberty, freedom, and justice for all. So when Dr. King shared his dream with the world atop the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he gave a mighty voice to the unheard cries of many, destined for change. Few could have imagined that nearly half a century later, Dr. King's body of work would forever be memorialized in stone, standing tall and gazing outward, not far from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where he lifted our collective conscience to profound action. Willing to put his life on the line for the cause of justice, Dr. King was jailed over 29 times. It was in a Birmingham, Alabama jail cell that he wrote these famous words: "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And mustering a generation to recognize the universal threat of injustice anywhere, Dr. King's example has proven that those who love their country can, in fact, change it. We must become the change that we want to see. A foot soldier for justice, Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize on October the 14th, 1964, combating racial inequality through nonviolence resistance. Dr. King lifted the quiet hopes of our nation with the powers of his voice and pen. Whether behind his pulpit in Montgomery, Alabama, or in a jail cell, or at a podium on the National Mall, Dr. King marshaled us toward the pinnacles of equal justice, using his voice as a weapon of change. Dr. King modeled the way that would produce historical results. A man of conviction, Dr. King fought not merely for the absence of oppression, but for the presence of opportunity. His towering words inspired many to join the fight. Take up the mantle. Do not be afraid, but move forward while marching into the history books of change. Not only would Dr. King inspire others to lean in to the cause that he championed, but to buy in as well. These dedicated men and women were willing to buy in to the cause because they believed in him, his leadership, his message, and his unwavering commitment for change. As these men and women push past the obstacles of oppression, America was watching. And so these individuals, they kept on marching. As these men and women weathered the storms and challenges of change, America was listening. And so these faithful men and women, they kept sounding the alarm for justice, not for some, but for all. Again, justice, not for some, but for all. Because this movement would not die, and they kept moving forward with unwavering resistance, these dedicated warriors changed not only laws, but also the hearts and minds of people everywhere. And as change rippled across the land, it began to strengthen over time, building on the progress realized on buses, in schools, and at lunch counters, so that eventually it would reverberate in the halls of government and be felt in the lives of people across our country. Willing to weather the storms of life, Dr. King taught us that the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of convenience and comfort, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. In his speech to a crowd in Memphis, Tennessee on April the 3rd, 1968, where the city sanitation workers were striking, Dr. King said these heart-wrenching words: "We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land." As we reflect on Dr. King's legacy, we celebrate a man and a movement that transformed our country. Given the causes he championed, from civil rights and international peace to job creation and economic justice. It is right that today we honor his work by serving others. Now more than ever, we must heed his teachings by embracing our convictions. We must live out our core values, strive for righteousness, and bring goodness to others. And at a time when many may question their faith in our institutions, we must meet Dr. King's call to stand in another person's shoes and see through their eyes. We must not be quick to judge, but work to understand the pain of others. We must also strive to see the good in each other. Dr. King's life reminds us that unconditional love will have the final word, and that only love can drive out hate. Only love can drive out hate. Only by drawing on the lessons of our past can we ensure the flame of justice continues to shine. By standing up for what we know to be right, we can align our reality closer with the idea enshrined in our founding documents that all people, not some people, but all people are created equal. So, how does one preserve the legacy of a man who once stated that life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Again, what are you doing for others? As a community, we must build bridges of hope, respect, love, and empathy for one another. We must embrace causes that promote the elevation of human dignity. We must seek to serve and not just to be served. We must partner with truth and justice, that freedom may forever ring in the halls of humanity. In remembering Dr. King, the man, the message, and the legacy, we remember a man who was a servant leader, who inspired others to act and championed a movement. Clothed in humility, Dr. King placed others before himself. He endured hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. And finally, he fought a good fight and he finished his course. So my question to each and every one of you here today: are you engaged in your fight? Are you engaged in the dream that God has placed inside of you? And are you willing to do as Dr. King? Stay committed to the struggle. Stay committed to the fight. And so when it is done, you can say, I fought a good fight and I finished my course. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to come and share with you today. May God bless you all.